Hi, this is Ash, and I've got with me over here Gav, who's a PwC partner. He's a veteran in the field of accounting. He's been around for the past 25 years in this field. And guess what? He's also an ex-cage fighter. He's an ex-nightclub doorman, and he's also been an ex-bodyguard. So nice to have you over here, Gav. I think I'll start with picking you on your accounting career. Yeah. So 25 years it's been. That's massive. So I want to know, would you like to tell us a little bit about how have things changed in the accounting industry across your time in these 25 years?
Yeah, 25 years is a very long time for me. It makes me feel very old. But it's interesting in terms of what's changed. I'd almost like to reverse it a little bit and actually talk about what hasn't changed, because that's standing out to me more at the moment. Yeah, there's three things for me. They're all interlinked, but there's three things for me which I don't think have changed in 25 years. First one is trust. Trust in the information we provide, trust in the work we do. On the background of that is the ethics and things that is embedded within all of the finance qualifications that you could do. But actually that trust is becoming increasingly important as we progress into a much more complex world. The tools that you use to bring trust to the image have gone beyond audit into assurance, ESG, etc. But actually trust is still at the heart of what I think the finance profession and the accountancy profession is all about. Second one is the human factor, and I've seen this accelerate massively over the last few years. As technology kind of takes over all of our lives, and most recently, ChatGPT, etc. The thing I find is still most important is at the heart of what we do is about relationships, and that is a human skill. The ability to build relationships, to assimilate information from better quality data. But actually it's that human interaction and that human intervention which I still think is at the heart of our profession. And then finally, one of the things that I find comes up over and over and over again in my career is the accountant's ability to simplify complex information. Right. And I think as ChatGPT and as data analysis grows, the ability to still simplify it down to a few key facts, a few key features, your rule of three, what are the three most important things I have to do today, that becomes incredibly important. So you combine trust, the human factor, and making simplicity out of a complex situation. I see that consistently throughout the 25 years I've been a qualified accountant. I see it in everything that we do, but it's the tools that have changed in terms of how we go about doing it.
Right. Now that you mentioned there's this the factor of ethics and moving into ESG, etc. So I thought, well, how about we connect it with you've got these professional qualifications that constantly try and bring these professions into what we're talking about in the later scenarios. Mm-hmm. So you've got ethics, you've got ESG integrating into professional qualifications. Mm-hmm. So do you think professional qualifications has in any way shaped your career as an accountant or helped you grow with the field across these?
Absolutely, in a multitude of ways. So I'm an ICAW chartered accountant, so I qualified in the UK, like say 25 years ago. And the qualification I did then is almost unrecognisable from the qualification you do now. And that's the same with all of the professional bodies. They all evolve their qualification to suit the needs of the current market and the current profession. Now, there is always a time lag. The qualifications are fundamentally exam-based, and for an exam you have to have a syllabus, you have to have it locked down by a date in time. So it's always kind of a year out of date, effectively. So some of the technology changes you don't see reflected in the qualification sort of like immediately. It takes a little bit of time to come through. But they keep up, and of course they make up for this difference with the CPD requirements. And all qualifications, all of finance qualifications, they all require you to maintain your CPD, your continuing professional development. That means that a qualified accountant is obligated to be on top of things. As a chartered accountant, I find lots of information produced by my institute and other professional bodies, pushing me into understanding how ChatGPT affects the profession, how artificial intelligence from other sources affects the profession. So I think the profession has grown and it's evolved, and you see those changes very much, as I said, in the tools that you use and the application of those tools. But it still comes back to the same three things. It still comes back to trust, it still comes back to the human factor, and it still comes to simplicity in a complex world.
So you think you can what I can take out of what you just said is that you can do a professional qualification, will of course help you out, but it's still on your responsibility to take it forward and ensure you're top of your skills on these three factors that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, if I think back to what I was doing when I qualified, I started off in audit, as a lot of people in our profession do. But once I left the auditing profession and I look at what I do now, I'm still a qualified accountant. I have that qualification as my benchmark, my rock that I sit on. But actually the skills that I've developed have actually been as a result of being in the profession, but they're not something that was covered in the qualification. You know, the skills I bring to bear now are very different from what I learnt when I did the qualification. I think the qualifications themselves give you a fantastic starting point. Gives you an amazing way, something to fall back on, something to give you that confidence that if you're in a role that you don't think is quite right for you, you have the confidence to step out of that role and go, right, I'm going to do something else because I've got my qualification that sits behind me and that validates my skills, my skill set, my ethics, etc. So it gives you the confidence to be able to do things that you really enjoy doing.
How do you think the perception would be if you were to employ an accountant? So would your requirements of the accountant grow with the industry? Is it also giving them the space to, keep up to these new changes, or do you expect they've got to be on top of their game always? Or how do you think the industry works?
I think the qualifications actually give you a really great start on this because they encourage you to think. One of the things that I always say to people in interviews is, what do you think? Tell me what you think about something. Don't tell me what you've read. Don't tell me what somebody else has told you. Tell me what you think. And I think all of the qualifications around the world set you up nicely to develop your own thought process, your own approach to dealing with current issues. It also gives you the ability to to digest information and come up with that thought process, which you can then turn into a project, a proposal, an initiative, a business, or what have you. So I think it equips you very well with the tools that you need to take forward.
So do you think it's safe to say that an accountant could get the necessary basic information from a professional qualification, but you've got to think by yourself, like you said, and if you are a person who provides solutions based on what you learned, then that is something that employers are always looking for.
Absolutely. When people ask me what I do for a living, I actually really struggle to explain it because I'm a qualified accountant, but I don't do accounting. I help run a training business, but I'm not a teacher. I find it very difficult to explain what I do, and I think that's because I have such a broad toolkit that I can draw on for various different things, whether it's standing in front of a room full of people presenting an IFRS proposal, dealing with ESG issues, whether it's working as a consultant, whether it's running a business. I think no matter what you do, that skill set you develop starts with the qualification and then it builds on from there. So I think it's really valuable. But I think when you're interviewing somebody who's got a qualification, the obvious question is, what have you done with your qualification since you got it?
I want to key in on a couple of other points that you mentioned about is, the ChatGPT and maybe extending a little bit into artificial intelligence and big data. How do you think that has shaped the industry, or what is the ask of the accountants on that ground?
That's a really difficult question, and it's a great question. It's one I get asked quite frequently. I think if you consider that data is an ocean, it's deep at places, it's shallow in places. There is danger, there is safety, there is fun and games, there is real opportunity to sort of feed the work. Data is a huge issue, a huge topic. What we are doing at the moment with a lot of artificial intelligence tools, a lot of data visualization tools, is we are dipping our toes in that ocean. We don't really know where it's going to end up. We don't really know what all of the risks are. What we have to do is we have to approach it with a skeptical mindset. We can't just believe the data that we're presented. You have to be able to analyze it, interpret it, and come up with some insights based on that data. That has never changed. What has changed is the access to the data. It used to be a lake, now it's an ocean. So therefore, I think the skills that we developed back in the 1990s when I qualified, are still the same skills as today. You're just now looking at a much bigger. So you need new tools, better sort of access to visualization tools like Power BI, Tableau, etc. The ability to use kind of like Python and things like that to be able to interrogate data, to be able to find the answers that are sitting within it. And I think as the data resources get bigger, the skills we need get greater and the tools we need have to be developed.
Got it. How do you think this has got a role to play into even the ESG side of things with sustainable, the environmental reporting, sustainability reporting, etc.? How do you think accountants need to come up on that side of things?
Yeah. You see, sustainability is actually not new for accountants. It's been around for a very long time. We were doing corporate social responsibility reporting years ago. What is really interesting with ESG is the way that the banking sector has woken up to it and are now considering it as part of the investment. And at the end of the day, as the old adage goes, show me the money. ESG is now driving where money goes, and therefore people are much more interested in it. The finance community has a massive role to play because that's where a lot of this data and cost management and sort of comes from. So I think sustainability is very important in what we do. There are regulations coming through, and I go back to my first point. These regulations and the information that's provided, how do the general public and how do governments, how do they trust the information they're seeing? How do we communicate that information in terms of what it actually is costing? How do we make decisions that are for the longer term than the next cycle of the politics of the world? How do we think about the next quarter being the next quarter of a century, not the next quarter of a year? So I think sustainability is never going to go away. It's always going to be there. And at the moment, it's got the priority of the world of business, which is right. It's got the priority of government, which is right. And the accountancy community have to step up and say, actually, we're at the heart of this. We can deliver this information. We can help you with decision making. We can show that a lot of ESG projects actually have positive MPVs and actually are good business decisions, not just good sustainability decisions.
So if I have to look at everything that you've said until now, so an accountant has got to have the same 3 basic skills that you would say. And while you use that, you could have your professional qualifications that give you a good foundation on the technical side of things. But you can't lose your individual thinking and how you can be a problem solver.
Absolutely.
And I would imagine that goes into how employers are looking for accountants to be those problem solvers for them. And you keep up to the real world of things in terms of ESG. You're already a part of, accountants have already been a part of ESG before. Now, this has been the journey that you have observed in the past 25 years. Where do you think this is going to lead in the next couple of decades or the next few years?
If I had to polish my crystal ball and try and come up with a prediction. I mean, I struggle to know what I'm going to have for dinner next week. So talking about what the profession is going to look like in years, I think is very difficult. Again, I would argue that if the same 3 factors have been there for the last 25 years, why wouldn't they be there for the next 25 years? I think the tools will develop, but I actually think the role of the CFO, I think, is going to change quite dramatically. You're much more of a business partner already, but I think that will extend. But I think bringing trust into information is going to be critical for the profession over the next few years, whether it's in the world of sustainability. There is evidence of greenwashing all over the place. So, trust in that information becomes critical as well. I think those human skills are going to stay, because how we communicate with each other, how we build relationships, how we progress society and act in the public interest is absolutely critical. And I think, again, that simplicity in a complex world, and the world is not going to get any simpler. The world is going to get more complex as more things come into it. The finance community has the skill set to be able to simplify that. But just dropping back to qualifications, the word accountant is not protected in most jurisdictions around the world. So anybody can call themselves an accountant. Therefore, the importance of having a qualification from a recognized qualifying body, whether that's sort of like ICAW that I'm a member, an ACCA qualification, a CFA, CMA, Indian Chartered, South African Chartered, the list goes on. The importance of holding a qualification, I think, just establishes you in the market for knowing what you're talking about and having that inbuilt balance of trust, human factor, and the ability to simplify things. And I've seen a lot of changes. I mean, I can't remember the last time I wore a tie to work. I'm probably one of the only partners in PwC that's got tattoos and that comes from the background, as you described, of cage fighting and things like that. When I started in my career, I couldn't have imagined someone joining the profession with my background. I'm looking forward to seeing who's going to join the profession over the next 25 years, because it's not going to be people who wear suits to work every day. It's not going to be people who went straight from school to university to the profession. They're going to come from a variety of backgrounds. There's going to be data scientists. There's going to be people with jobs that don't even exist now. And I think the accountancy profession is right on the cusp of transformation on a dramatic scale as technology really comes into business. And I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Gavin. It was amazing talking to you and getting all of your insights from the past 25 years.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.